Annual meetings, the first type of membership meeting that we're going to dive into, the one that I think everyone is familiar with because you have it annually, right? Or you're supposed to, I hope you are. Lots of issues that can come up with annual meetings. So we're going to dive into some tips and tricks later tonight about how to make them more successful, because there are a lot of different ways and things that you can do. But let's just cover the purpose of the annual meeting and what it is and what it looks like first. So you are required as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Minnesota to bring your members together, the homeowners or members. You're required by your governing documents. It's going to say something like, the members of the association shall gather once a year for a meeting, right? It's going to say that in your bylaws. State statute in two different places says that as a nonprofit corporation, the Nonprofit Corporate Act 317A, which is referenced here on the slide, says that you need to get your homeowners together. And then if you're under MCIOA, the Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, it also says there that you have to at least once a year bring your members together. So we know we're required to have one. But what I really want to talk about is what is the purpose of them, because that's where interpretations of what the annual meeting is supposed to look like and supposed to be can really vary. So really there's four purposes of the annual meeting. The first and foremost purpose is what I just said, because you have to have it, right? Once a year, you have to come together. It also says that you have to give state statute, and I'm sure your documents say too, that you have to give some sort of a report of the association. Activities and financials, that's the report you're supposed to give. And that can look different for every association. But typically, I like to include in the annual meeting notice an annual report, and your bylaws will actually dictate what an annual report should include. How much cash you've got in your checking account and your reserve. Are there any lawsuits or pending lawsuits? What's the insurance status? And what's the collections activities? And what are the capital expenditures that have happened in the last couple of years? Those are usually the requirements of the annual report. So I would include that in the annual meeting notice. And then you should go over it at the annual meeting, just as an overview of, hey, here's what's happened in the last year. The third thing, and this is really important, any other business that may require or may arise that requires the members' approval or the members to vote. I'm a stickler on annual meetings because there should be nothing else other than the fourth point here, the primary purpose of your annual meeting being the election of officers, the election of directors, not officers, of directors. The election of people to your board. That is the first and foremost primary purpose of your annual meeting, is the election of directors. Or it's anything else that would require the members' approval. So maybe you'd have a special meeting to amend the documents or approve an increase to the budget or a special assessment if you're required to have the members to vote on those things, or amending of documents. Those are examples of things that might be done at an annual meeting because they require the members' vote. But otherwise, there's nothing else that should happen at the annual meeting unless you need to have it otherwise, right? So the final thing I want to say is it doesn't say anywhere in state statute, nor does it say it in your governing documents, typically. I don't know why, it's just kind of this afterthought, but one of the things that should be done at your annual meeting is you approve the minutes from the previous meeting, from the previous annual meeting. Because the minutes are the minutes of the membership's meeting, so those minutes should be approved by the members. Not by the board, but by the members. So you're not going to call a special meeting of the members a month after the annual meeting to approve the minutes. So instead, when you do it, you approve the 2022 annual meeting minutes at the 2023 annual meeting, right? So those are the things that you have an annual meeting for. To fulfill your requirement to have one, to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, to vote in directors, to give some sort of a report, and minuscule chance that you do if you have something else that the members need to vote on. Those are the purposes of your annual meeting, and you really need to stick to that. Please do. And again, we're going to go over some tips and tricks to make annual meetings more successful, but stick to those things. An annual meeting is a business meeting of the membership. It should be your shortest meeting of the year. But instead, for a majority of associations, it ends up being their longest. We'll talk about how you can make sure that that doesn't happen to you. But let's talk about the notice requirements of that meeting. So now that you know you have to have that meeting and what the meeting is for, there are requirements about the notice of the meeting. And your governing documents are going to say it. And then state statute, if you're under Iowa, also says it. But the typical language, an overwhelming majority of most documents say the same thing, and then state statute says this, that the annual meeting notice shall be provided to members no less than 21 days and no more than 30 days before the meeting. So you've got this requirement of a window of time in which you have to send out that notice. Now there's a lot of debate and discussion right now about how that notice is delivered, and you got to be careful about this because your governing documents, 80% of them, 90% of them, an overwhelming majority of them, use very specific language, and a lot of times it says, shall be delivered by postal mail to all members. So an overwhelming majority of the time, you are mailing out your annual meeting notice within that time period. And that's important, and honestly, I like that because we're getting to the day and age about electronic communication. Can't we just send out the notice via email? And I get that. It's a cost saver. Certainly the mail is probably not as reliable as maybe it used to be or ever was. I don't know, you decide. But it's important though to note a lot of governing documents that are being rewritten right now are actually using language to say that the delivery of a notice may be electronic. So, okay, great. But my personal opinion is I don't really like that. I kind of like the default language. And here's why. As unreliable as the postal office might be, the legal definition of something being delivered is if it doesn't bounce back to the sender, it's considered legally delivered. Which I know is funny because with the reliability of the postal mail getting worse and worse, I get that it's hard to justify that, but that's the truth of the matter by legal definition. So a homeowner can't, if your management company, your manager sends out the annual meeting notice 25 days before the meeting and nothing bounces back and a homeowner comes to the meeting and says, I didn't get the notice, you didn't fulfill your obligation. Well, your manager can say, it didn't bounce back to our office, so we fulfilled the association's duty and responsibility of the notice. So I like to stick to the notice. So a few things that you should include in that notice. Usually it's a cover page just saying the date and the time and the place and come to the annual meeting and here's the purpose of it. Include the agenda, right? Which 90% of the times that agenda is going to be pretty bare bones and basic. We're going to call the meeting to order. We're going to make sure we got quorum. We're going to approve the minutes. We're going to give a report. We're going to elect directors. We may have other new business if the members need to vote on something, but most of the time, again, you're not. And then you adjourn, right? Usually those are the things. Include a proxy. Include the minutes from the previous meeting. That's really important. And why is that? Because remember we talked about one of the functions of it is to approve the minutes. So it's really important that you include the minutes from the previous meeting in that annual meeting packet, in that annual meeting notice, because then when you get to the meeting, you can say, hey, you received the annual meeting minutes. I'm sure you all read them diligently. So can I have a motion to approve them? Because if you didn't include them in the notice, then you have to pass them out at the meeting, or you have to read them. God forbid you have to read them, tell people to bring a pillow, right? So really important to just make sure that that's included because it then just allows you to say, hey, you all received the minutes. Let's get them passed, right? Include a ballot if you know who your directors are, but make sure that you say this is not the official ballot because you should be giving out the ballot when you get to the meeting. And why is that important? Because if you have nominations from the floor, you have to update the ballot. So that ballot that you send in the notice is not the official ballot, but it's nice to include it because if you did have nominations going into the meeting, at least people then know, oh, we have 3 spots that are up and it looks like there's 3 people that volunteered. Fantastic, right? So include the ballot if you need to. And then the annual report, I touched on that. Your bylaws do specify like 5 or 6 very specific things that you need to report for financial activity. It's a 1-pager. It's just a 1-page document. You know, your governing documents talking about the annual report, it doesn't say that it is supposed to be a part of the annual meeting notice. It doesn't say that, but it just says you're supposed to do one, give one. But it does make sense to do it as a part of the annual meeting packet because, right, you're already sending it out and then you can go over that during the meeting. And then if there are any other supplemental materials, if there is some other thing that you're voting on, or some associations like to include like a candidate profile of the people that might be up for the board of directors. So that's the overview of the annual meeting. Again, you have to have it. There's a time window of when you have to do it and when you can give the notice. And then those are some examples of the things that should be included in that notice and what that notice requirement is. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more in a little bit about how you can make those annual meetings more successful.